Hey, Nick, Sean Spicer. I understand there's some controversy brewing about how many subscribers you have on YouTube. You have more subscribers than anybody. Then it's probably the biggest, largest YouTube subscription that anybody's had. But also, it's not numbers that matter, Nick. And I know everyone's going to quibble over this, but it's content. It's quality, and your subscribers are amazing. They're great. They're high quality subscribers, and that's really what you have to look at. Don't just focus on the numbers. I mean, if people are spewing a bunch of fake news, just don't get in the mud. They're amazing folks. Their engagement, the way that they like the videos. Anyway, I hope this puts this to the end. I hope that this controversy is over and we know who the real YouTube subscriber champ is. And it's you, Nick.
Hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. Thank you all for joining us. With me today is Commander Lance McMillan, and I got to tell you that really is Sean Spicer. That's not that's Sean Spicer in his office, and we got a couple of those. The two I want that we don't have is I want to get Vicente Fox. You know, I've said this before, like In Time will no build, no fucking wall. That one, and yeah, I really want to have that one. I want to have Baghdad Bob. I don't know what he's going to say, but Baghdad Bob, something along the lines of, In Time is not under attack. In Time, there is no military at In Time's door. I don't know. We'll figure it out. That's my long-term goal. It's nice to have goals. Mine is to get Baghdad Bob to mention the show. So we were supposed to be doing overtime. And we are streaming on Overtime. We're streaming on In Time as well. We were supposed to do, or not Overtime, sorry, we're supposed to do the rundown. So why aren't we doing the rundown? Starsky's not going to be able to make it today. And I've been in touch with him, and he essentially said that the command, something he needed to do for them. And so he's just up. There you go. It's kind of sweet. He's a really sweet guy. He's a nice guy. And he's just always like, I'm so sorry, Nick. I wish I could make it, but I was sitting there going, he's in a war zone. I always feel guilty when he's apologizing to me for not making the show. It's like, you're hiding from missiles, dude. So
give yourself a break.
I know. Well, and he's dedicated to coming on and helping get out the word about what he's doing, which is very important to us. So we decided rather than do a rundown, we're still going to talk about Ukraine, and there's a couple of things that I'd like to discuss. Now, normally we have on, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we normally have on Operator Starsky and Commander Lance McMillan together. Starsky is a Ukrainian National Guardsman and gives us a lot of info about what's really going on in Ukraine, and it's been pretty amazing having him on. But I think as major combat operations sort of start up again in Ukraine, we're going to be seeing probably less and less of him for understandable reasons. Commander Lance McMillan, I'm going to let him introduce himself in a minute, but sort of can give us a much more strategic point of view and what's going on in a much more global sense. The two of them have streamed a lot together by now, actually, both on our show and on the Shills. And I think they both have a lot of respect for each other and work well together because they can handle sort of both the small and the large view. So we'll get to Commander McMillan in just a second. Before we do, the part almost every YouTuber hates the most, the begging. So we are slaves to the YouTube algorithm. If it likes us, it pushes our content to other people, and we get more views, we get more subs. For YouTube, this is a business. This is a business. That's all it is. And I'm not allergic to money, but we're trying to do a show that educates and informs and talks about the news in ways that hopefully overcomes some of the problems that we see in the news today. We've talked about that before. I won't get into it right now. But I hope that that's useful to you. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, share our content, share whatever you like, pass on, always, like and subscribe. The reason we say that isn't for our health. It's because YouTube is a business, and the more that people like our content, the more they say, hey, maybe this is good stuff, and they boost us in the algorithm, and it just helps out the show. So if you like the show, be supportive, and that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, we've been moving our more sort of dialogues and casual conversations to our sister channel, Overtime. That channel is not yet monetized. There's a lot it can't do. Because it's under 1,000 subs. So if you get the chance to like and subscribe over there and help us out over there, that's a really big help. All of us are in this for things other than to shill our stuff and to beg for likes, subscribes. The reason basically every content creator you've ever seen does it is because it really does have an impact. So keeping that in mind, I hope you will do that. And also keeping in mind that that's not why you're here. Let's get on to the show. With us today is Commander Lance McMillan. Commander, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Glad to hear it.
I've got a little doggy here that is trying to tell me she wants to go out. So I'm going to leave the frame, but I'll still be talking.
All right. So while you're out with the dog, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us, who you are and what your qualifications are in regards to talking about war.
Oh, goody. I'm a retired U.S. Navy commander. My specialties while I was in service were operational logistics and amphibious operations. I worked very closely with the Army and the Marine Corps for most of my 25-year career. I also was the lead logistics planner for our buildup of forces preparatory to Operation Iraqi Freedom, or the invasion of Iraq. I'm a graduate of the Naval War College and the Combined Staff and Command College. So I've got all that going for me. Plus, on the civilian side, I've been studying warfare, military history since I was in, at least elementary, probably, at least junior high, probably elementary school. And I've had a number of war games, military subjects that I designed, published. And there's the exciting history for why I'm so important.
Well, actually, I got to tell you, one of the things I enjoy is, I teach history, and it's rare to find somebody who really has a pretty good grasp of history. But, you and I go blow for blow on talking a lot of history, especially in Russia. Your knowledge exceeds mine, and we both know that. But it's nice to have somebody with whom I can have these conversations and get into it in depth in a way that you can't with other people. So it's always a delight to have those conversations with you. And one other quick reminder, just as we start, if you would like to super chat, I know Starsky's not here, but, he's a supporter of the show. We're a very big supporter of him. And we have said that all super chats for shows on which he's on, or shows sort of dedicated, the Starsky shows, of which this is one, all the super chats will go to the charity of his choice. He has chosen the 𝐓𝐢𝐻𝐚𝐬 volunteer organization. He's talked about them on occasion. We have talked about them before as well. Their information is in the description. You cannot super chat on Overtime. The reason, again, that's our sister channel. It's still new. It's still young. That's why we're trying to grow it and grow it as rapidly as possible so that you guys don't have to do all this juggling, which we apologize for, but it's a necessary step. So if you go to In Time, you can super chat if you would like. 100% of all super chats are going to the Vatra volunteer organization. So if you're interested, that is also another way to support. So having said all that, let's start. There are a few things that I'd like to discuss. What appears to be the vandalism and or destruction of an Su-27. Is that right? Yeah, I think it's 27. And a few other things that are going on. I'd like to talk about Bakhmut. But before we do that, it's been a year now. So could you just give us sort of a rundown of how this started and roughly why we're going through all this?
Sure. Why it started, that's a really good question. I think you have to go back to at least 2008, when you have the Ukrainians have the Revolution of Dignity. They chuck 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐴, I can't remember his name, the former ruler.
Lukashenko, yeah.
Lukashenko, okay. Anyway, they chuck him out. He's a big Putin supporter. They were buddies, and he goes into exile, and he's in Russia. And then you have, in rapid succession, in 2008, the Russians annex Crimea. Technically, that's Ukrainian territory, but the Ukrainians aren't really organized enough at that point to resist, so it's kind of presented as a fait accompli. In 2014, you have the Russians start moving into border provinces where they've been agitating with, we'll call it the ethnic minority, the Russian ethnic minorities living in those regions, saying that they're being persecuted. And part of that is they're infiltrating Spetsnaz and GRU troops inside to support this rebellion. Most of it really isn't a rebellion, it's a protest movement. And for the most part, it seems like they don't want to leave Ukraine. They just want to have certain changes to their local governing. Anyway, the Russians seized the two territories, Luhansk and Donetsk, and there's kind of a Sitzkrieg war that goes on from 2014 up until 2022, when the real war starts. And it was ongoing during that entire period. So that's why are they doing it? I think it's a combination of the Russians are irritated that the Ukrainians, see themselves as independent and not a subservient client Russian state. I think it's also that they have a number of resources that the Russians want to stake claim to. And then there's the whole question of the East-West divide. And I think that is a significant, perhaps the primary reason that the war in 2022 starts. And that's because when the Budapest Accords are signed, which is when the Ukrainians give up the nuclear weapons that they had when Ukraine and Russia divided, there were still a lot of nuclear weapons stored in Ukraine. So they were technically under Ukrainian control. The Ukrainians agreed that they would give up all those nuclear weapons in return for Russia recognizing their territorial sovereignty, and it guarantees on both sides that the U.S. and Russia would come to their aid if they were attacked by the other party.
Mm-hmm.
That's the agreement. And of course, when they are attacked, the U.S. does nothing. And when they are attacked again, the U.S. does nothing. And finally in 22, when they're attacked, we say, maybe it's time to wake the hell up and do something. So we start sending them aid, pressuring our allies to send them aid. Anyway, all of that ties in for this East-West divide, is that the Ukrainians are increasingly looking, after the revolution of dignity, that they are going to be siding both economically and politically with Western Europe rather than with their former Russian/Soviet bloc. And that really pisses the Russians off. They had always seen that even though the Budapest Accords were signed, Ukraine was still going to naturally fall within their sphere of influence. And so when it starts looking like they're not going to do that, there's a sense of urgency that something must be done to get them back under our control. Something must be done to prevent NATO from expanding into Ukraine and thereby having the potential to put a dagger right up against our heart by being able to invade Russia from Ukraine. That's the mental processes I think are going on in Russia, and that's why the war starts.
Well, a number of countries as well are holding U.S. nuclear ICBMs, and these countries are NATO countries that are holding them as a result of, all right, stand by one, we're going to have somebody else joining us in a minute, as a result of the, with NATO, sort of a mutual defense agreement. So if Ukraine ends up joining NATO, then that would be nuclear missiles, essentially the same situation that we had with Turkey that caused the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Which is that there's essentially a first strike capability that we have, and I think we already kind of would have that anyway because there are other member nations that are. Yeah.
I would caveat that. I would caveat that by saying that's a potential risk. The countries that we have nuclear weapons stored with, during the Cold War, we essentially pressured them into, yeah, we'll do it. And also from their standpoint, those countries who have those arrangements kind of, in some cases, wanted and urged us to bring them in as deterrence against perceived potential Soviet aggression. I don't see that same situation exists currently. So the likelihood of us wanting to station nuclear weapons inside Ukraine, I think, is pretty low. We could even have gone so far as to mollify the Russians had that come to the point where part of the agreement of accepting Ukraine into NATO was that nuclear weapons would not be stationed in Ukraine. The other part is that technology has advanced significantly since those original agreements with other NATO members were signed. And we don't really need to station nuclear weapons in Ukraine. We can still achieve the same, roughly the same effect with existing arrangements we already have. So all of that plays into why I don't think that's a valid argument.
All right, but is it possible Putin saw that as a valid argument, or no?
Potentially yes, but I suspect more likely that became a potential excuse. You know, I invaded because I thought, even though he never really assumed that was the case. That's my guess.
Starsky, when we first spoke with him, used the word genocide, and terrorism, which I was thinking might in fact be a little over the top because, you know, yeah, it's a war and wars happen and they're absolutely terrible, but genocide is a very specific thing. Terrorism is a very specific thing, and not all wars are either of the two. But the more I've looked into this, the more I realized, no, I think he may have hit the nail on the head with both of them. Let's talk about genocide for a minute. There's an argument that we've seen that among the other motivations and things that Putin's trying to do, that he is in fact trying to ethnically cleanse Ukraine off the face of the map, and or not just Ukraine. What are the arguments for that, and do you find them compelling?
I do. We have seen that since the war started, in fact, prior to the invasion, there was some indication it was already beginning to happen at a low level inside the two occupied oblasts, the Donetsk and Luhansk, which is that the Russians are taking people of Ukrainian extraction and shipping them deep into the interior of Russia. And the idea is to disperse them, and since they won't be able to associate with one another, their Ukrainianness will leave them. They've done this with other regions during the Soviet era. They moved people out. A very good example of that is what they did to the Crimean Tatars. The Tatars, lived, and that was their primary area. Their homeland, if you will, was the Crimea. During the Soviet era, they were systematically shipped out of Crimea to other areas. And so there really isn't a Tatar homeland anymore. They're so dispersed that it's really hard for them to maintain themselves as a distinct ethnicity.
We do have a couple of questions. We're going to get to those in a minute in the super chat. We will get to that in a minute. Thank you all very much. And I know that 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿 wanted to join us. He is more than welcome. So if he wants to, he's got that link anytime he's interested. So it's also genocide in an interesting sort of subversive way, in the way that he's drawing his troops, is it not?
Yeah, that's part of what we're talking about, is when they declared these partial mobilizations, the initial waves were primarily focused on ethnic areas inside Russia, of saying, okay, we're going to take these people from this small eastern semi-autonomous republic, and we're going to tell them, hey, you owe us another, 6,000 troops. And the governor will say, yep, whatever you say, mobilize them and send them off to the front. So far more ethnic Russian minorities are being killed in the fighting than are being killed of regular ethnic Russians, if you will.
All right. And Mr. 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿 has joined us. His camera is not on yet, but his audio should be. So, Chris, how are you?
I do well. How about you, gentlemen?
Very good.
Doing very well, thank you. So let's quickly hit the super chat. That was Raven7. Believe in the AFU. I don't know what the AFU is. UA, thank you very much for that. What is that?
All blanked up. That's what I would interpret it as.
Oh, okay. All right, well, it may clarify. And then we had a question, and this may or may not be the time, but there was, I guess, a Russian soldier who said when he gets back to Russia, he's going to attack the Kremlin, and obviously an expression of dissatisfaction. But we've had far less dissatisfaction with the war from inside Russia than I think most people would expect. Everybody knows that it's been terrible. There's been a lot of misinformation coming out, but still, why aren't the Russians getting more upset by this?
Ooh, now we get into cultural heritage. Since the days of the czars, the Russians have lived under a very oppressive regime with a very robust state security apparatus. Mm-hmm. Anybody who dared criticize the ruling class would be disappeared, persecuted, what have you. And we're not talking 50 or 100 years. We're talking back into the 1600s. So a long time. And it's kind of become ingrained in the Russian psyche that you don't stand up and criticize. You just accept your lot of misery and go on with life. And I think that's a lot of what's happening here. The only times you see the Russian people begin to rise up out of that apathetic state is when Russia goes into a war and starts losing significantly. So you see that occur, for example, in 1905 in the Russo-Japanese War, where they suffer horrendous casualties and effectively lose the war. The Russian people get mad. You have a quasi-uprising. The Tsar has to grant them the right to have Duma and, a powerless parliament, so to speak. And then, of course, in 1917, as a result of the catastrophic failures on the Eastern Front in World War I, you get the Bolshevik Revolution. The people rise up, get rid of the boss. The Soviet government comes in, or Bolshevik government comes in. They don't follow through on the promise that they're going to kind of democratize, make everything the Soviet model where each little farm, each factory acts as its kind of independent organization that determines how things are going to be run, and they all send representatives up and up. So it's a representative system, supposedly, except it isn't. You replace the czar with the commissar. So that's the kind of situation they've been living under, and I don't see that it's going to happen in Russia now unless the casualty count keeps ratcheting up. And that could, again, trigger some sort of popular uprising. But typically, uprisings in Russia are top-down driven, not bottom-up driven. So what you need is somebody at the top who's going to say, I see an opportunity here. Now, they might get lucky, and the opportunity might be, hey, I'm going to bring my country into the 21st century here, but in all likelihood, it will be, I see an opportunity to make myself top dog and start stealing stuff instead of Putin stealing stuff.
So what I'd like to do now, thank you for that. What I'd like to do is there are, I think, 2 or 3 things that I think are on the agenda for discussing today. First of all, how do we see this ending, and what are the possibilities? Second of all, what do we see happening over the next couple of months? We know that things have slowed down because of the weather, and we're going to talk about that. So what now that the weather is changing, what are we expecting? And then also I'd like to talk about Bakhmut and the attack on the 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿. But before we do any of that, what I would like to do is, since Christopher Mowdy is now here with us, and he hasn't had much of a chance to ask questions, I'd like to pass the ball to him and see what he would like to have asked and or answered. So, so he is, just so that this is a very formal show, so we want to make sure that he is referred to by his proper title. It is Dr. Reverend Christopher Mowdy Jr. Esquire, and AFU, by the way. So Raven 7, it was a what was it? I think it was £9.99. Believe in the AFU. That stands for Armed Forces of Ukraine. Duh. So thank you for that. Appreciate the clarification. Thank you very much for the super chat. That will be going to
with
the
context. I would have understood it.
Yeah. Well, it's been a long week. So thank you very much for that super chat. Again, anybody who's just joining us, come join us on the Discord. Commander McMillan is there. Most of our guests are there. So come join us. We're also constantly talking about Ukraine. We have a lot of breaking news that we do there about Ukraine and other topics. If you're just joining us too, if you can go over to Overtime, like, subscribe, and share that content, it really helps us out. Dr. Reverend, it is your ball.
First of all, speaking of the Discord, McMillan's handle is the Bald Clown. Who's the Bald Clown now?
I am not relinquishing the title.
Oh, you with your titles. Like after I just get introduced with 14 titles, right? I had a question that was a little bit of a curveball based on the topics that Nick was bringing up. But I have a friend of mine. We talk a lot about, we try to talk about global events based on our keyhole perception of what's going on. And he brought to my attention something, again, this is a little bit of a curveball. It does relate to Ukraine, though. He brought up the idea, and I don't know whether this is an idea that is like rustling in far right circles or whatever, but it was this weird fact that like England, just like this year, finished paying down the debt that they owed in World War II, and the Ukraine is now at that amount and is getting further in debt. And even though he didn't connect the pieces for me, and and of course we had a discussion about like, what do you think that means, and this, that, and the other, he just found it super curious enough to bring to my attention. But it doesn't, I don't know whether it makes sense to make a big deal out of it. Is it the case that, so I guess the big question is, when the Ukraine war is over and the country is decimated and the economy is not going to be able to handle the financial debt that they've been under, like, how is that going to work out? Is it the case that, Russia's going to be responsible for some of the money that Ukraine owes? Or are they going to be put on a payment plan so that it's not going to be another 80 years until they finish paying it off? I don't know. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And now I'm going to disappoint you by saying, let's postpone that question and answer Nick's questions in series, because yours is a great dovetail at the end of that discussion. And it will make more sense if I answer it that way.
Or is
And
it possible
I bring it to
because
you
mine are better
because-
questions? Just a thought.
It's
Sorry.
true.
No, I think linearly. So the chronological order of what's going on now, what will likely happen soon, how does this end, what are the ramifications at the end of the war, which is what you
Good.
just
Well,
asked.
then it's not as much of a curveball as I thought.
Well,
It's nice.
It is. I had not considered that as a question, and it's an excellent one, and I do want to answer it.
Okay.
Because of my beady little lizard brain only thinks in linear fashion.
I'm along for the ride,
Be
brother.
a lot better.
I'm along for the ride. I hope that everyone brace yourself in the
I
audience.
wouldn't go that far.
There's going to be a quiz when we're done.
It's all downhill from here. Anyway, what's going on now, as Nick alluded to, the weather's crap, the ground is a mush. It's hard to drive vehicles off-road in the mush. So that puts, to a large extent, a foot on the brake of military operations. Things are slowing down and are going to stay relatively slow for the foreseeable future, for maybe another month. I don't know the climate patterns in Ukraine right now. And when I say patterns, I mean what's likely to occur over this period, because most of my study is based on World War II, and climate change has had a profound effect on the climate in Ukraine since that period. So things may dry out earlier, and that's what I'm kind of anticipating. It used to be that the spring thaw would start around late February and continue through about May. My guess, given the conditions now, is it's already been in progress for about a month and is probably going to continue up to mid to late April before things can get rolling again. Once that happens, I think we're going to see a Ukrainian offensive. We might also see a Russian offensive, but I doubt it. I'll explain why. I think a Ukrainian offensive is almost a sure thing, because that latest wave of, here, we're giving you all these fancy new toys, the Leopard tanks, the Abrams tanks, Challenger tanks, Bradley APCs, Marder APCs, et cetera, all of these being piled in at one time. And they all are going to be in position with trained crews ready to go about the same time as that ground starts drying out. And we know that the Ukrainians have been forming all that new equipment and those highly trained troops into assault brigades. And that's where things are going to start rolling. So I think an offensive is pretty much a sure thing when we get to that point. As I said, the Russians might do the same thing, but the difference here, the Ukrainians have been getting all this top-line equipment from outside. The Russians aren't getting really any equipment from anybody outside. They're having to rely on digging into their own stores and repairing their stuff. And they've taken hideous losses, both in personnel and in equipment. So we're seeing them now fielding early Cold War era tanks to continue fighting. That's kind of a sign of where things are going, is that Ukraine's getting all these really top-end modern tanks. The Russians are now starting to use the lower-end tanks. That will make a difference. So I don't see the Russians being able to mount a credible offensive. I mean, we know they just tried one recently in the past couple of weeks, and it's almost a non-event because it stalled out after it had gone, maybe half a kilometer. The Ukrainians just slaughtered the entire force. So there's that. Anyway, that's the immediate future. Where do I see things by the time we get into the end of the year? Is the war going to end? What conditions are necessary to do that? I think the key thing to understand there is that the war can't end until Putin is gone. Whether that's him being ousted in a coup, somebody popping a cap in his ass, or him voluntarily saying, guess what? I'm going into exile in Mozambique. See you guys later. Any one of those is a possibility.
He's a world leader, so we do have to use euphemisms here. Deposed with extreme prejudice is the end time.
I like that.
Deposed. I think that was a Titan invention. That's a copyright Titan.
So somebody went and took his deposition, and that was enough.
Yeah.
And they were very forceful about getting it from him.
You just made my day. Hearing you say the words "pop a cap" in Putin's ass, it's just that made my weekend.
That's good.
That's
good for something.
All right, keep going. I'm with you.
Anyway, he has to leave. He's in a position where he really can't back down, because doing so basically means they're going to haul him out and tear him limb from limb, and he'll be, as I like the euphemism, he'll become a permanent underground mushroom farmer in the woods outside Moscow. That's what will happen if he backs down. There will be, Russia has invested and spent way too much, both in terms of actual money, military equipment, and lives, and they've achieved nothing from that horrendous cost. Nobody's going to let them get away with that crap.
So his life is on the line. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it is, and that's why he won't back down. And no end can come while he's in power, because he can't back down. The only end possible is either Ukraine losing, giving up, or Ukrainian troops parading down Red Square. I don't see either of those as a realistic possibility. So it all hinges on bye-bye Vladimir. Once that happens, you still have to get the right combination of a leader who's willing to negotiate and find a solution that both sides are willing to accept to end the conflict.
Yeah, but China's already on top of that, aren't they?
I'd say we can wish, but that's opening a real Pandora's box without hope wallowing in the back corner of the box at the end. So, yeah. Well, let's not go down that road, please.
Hey, they're giving public suggestions for how the negotiations should go. I mean, they're
God. Yeah, the 12-point plan, I mean, even on clean paper, I still don't think I'd wipe my ass with that proposal. It really was so full of self-serving excrement. But yeah, I mean, they're trying to put the Chinese are trying to elevate themselves on the world stage, and this is one way of going about it, just trying to appear like they're the great peacemaker, sort of a Jimmy Carter, Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel sort of thing. You know, oh, I came up with this wonderful proposal and I solved this horrible crisis. I think that's what they were hoping, realizing that they had no chance it would ever happen. But the fact that they stood up on the world stage and made that proposal makes them look good. And they need that right about now, because they're also engaged in a huge amount of saber rattling themselves in the South China Sea area.
Well, and that it appears reasonably fair and balanced, you know, just if you look at it, you know, without a nuanced understanding of what's going on. It appears like it's even holding Russia, their allies, feet to the fire somewhat for what's been going on. So it does appear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, to end the war, you have to get the right guy to replace Putin, and then he's going to have to make a deal, and that puts us in the situation that you were alluding to, Reverend Doctor. What happens at the end of the war? So let's assume that we've come to the end of the war. Are there going to be reparations? I think most certainly there would be. Ukraine has been very, very badly damaged, while very little inside Russia proper has been damaged. And most of the damage that has been done in terms of lives lost, infrastructure, what little of it was damaged, it was all military related, whereas huge amounts of civilian infrastructure have been damaged in Ukraine. So there's going to be a demand as a precondition for reparations before the war will end. And that poses two things. A, is the amount of money that they're going to get from Russia going to be sufficient to pay down the loans? And B, is the reparation scheme that's imposed on Russia going to be so severe that we see a repeat of what happened in Germany after the war, the First World War, where some, moron stands up and starts preaching, we were stabbed in the back, this was unfair, we need to rearm, and you get a return to where we are right now in 20 years. So how does that all work out? I don't know. The other question is, what are these schemes? Well, first off, I don't know how much debt Ukraine has incurred, because much of what they've been given is literally that. It's a gift. So, yeah, they're definitely incurring costs to continue fighting the war, but many of these, oh yeah, we're giving you Leopard tanks, we're giving you HIMARS, we're all of that. My understanding is the bulk of the military equipment and munitions that is being provided is effectively gratis. And I know that money has also been thrown into the pot to help them continue to wage the war. Is that a gift? Is that a loan? I don't know. But the key is that either way, I don't think Ukraine has entered into crippling debt situation yet. There will be a major debt. They will be having to pay it off over a long period of time. But I'm presuming that the terms of any loans that they've got are going to be such that they can, as Britain did at the end of World War II, have that repayment scheme stretched out and be not so burdensome that they can recover their own country's economy. But they also have to rebuild the country. I think that's where the debt's likely to come, is at the end of the war. Yeah, they'll be given some money from, nations trying to help them, but I don't think all of that money that they get given after the war to rebuild is going to come close to being able to cover those costs. So they will have to negotiate all sorts of loans. IMF already was in the process of working with them to extend them loans. We know that. The trouble is IMF tends to put fairly severe restrictions on the people that take loans from them, austerity. And then you end up with that being a similar crippling burden on whatever post-war Ukrainian government is there. And you end up with another Weimar Republic potential problem.
All right, I don't know. We may have lost the Dr. Reverend. We have been joined by 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐿𝐤. He's been here for a while, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow. 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐿𝐤, how are you?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt the flow either, so I was just... Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can hear
you. Yep.
Sweet. So I have two questions.
I will try to answer.
You were speaking brief. I'll ask this one first because you were kind of touching on the end of the war, how it ends. My concern has always been, what if Putin isn't deposed with prejudice? He maintains power in a stranglehold. Ukraine is successful in mostly pushing them out of Ukrainian territory, but Russia just sits back and starts dropping bombs from drones, throwing in missiles and all that stuff from their own territory. So, and I've heard a lot of people talk about that they could probably maintain that for a couple of years doing that. How do you end up with a resolution at that point? I mean, would we support Ukraine going into Russia? I mean, what do we do then when we get to the stalemate where Russia just keeps throwing ordnance into there, but aren't physically in the country for Ukrainians to combat?
Right. Okay. First off, I would classify that not as an end of the war. The war is continuing. It's just entered a sitzkrieg phase as opposed to a blitzkrieg. So they're sitting around lobbing artillery, missiles, drones at each other. And that can theoretically go on almost indefinitely until one side or the other says, okay, enough is enough. Let's put an end to this nonsense and I'll give you some of what you want. And again, I go back to my original premise. The precondition to ending the war, to actually stopping the fighting, is a removal of Putin and a replacement of him by somebody who's willing to negotiate an end to the hostilities. The situation you're talking about, I think, is probably likely if he's not removed at some point in the near future. I remember when we were talking to Starsky a month or two ago, and this exact question came up. And his response was that he didn't think the war was going to end this year, 2023. He thought it would go into 2024 for just this reason. He thinks that even though Ukraine manages to mostly expel Russia from its territory, the Russians aren't going to give in. At that point, I don't think there's going to be any impetus to invading Russia. That opens up a huge can of worms that nobody wants to go down. So I think what you end up with is the Ukrainians kind of doing the reverse, or the same thing that the Russians would be doing to them. And you start getting Ukraine hitting Russian infrastructure targets inside their own country. And you end up with this strategic bombing thing. It's analogous to what used to be called the War of the Cities in the Iran-Iraq War, where for a period of about a year and a half, there was very little happening on the front lines. All that was happening was both sides shooting missiles and launching air raids against each other's major cities. It wasn't achieving anything other than killing people, but it was the governments on both sides having run out of options, being completely impotent on the ground, and having to do something to show that they were still prosecuting this war.
And if we end up, I guess, if we end up in that situation, which seems to me that's a fairly likely scenario that could come about.
I agree.
What do you think that the NATO stance is going to be? Are we going to? I mean, Ukraine's not going to be able to maintain a bombardment of Russia to try and get them to stop bombarding them without, NATO help. Do you think NATO is going to continue to supply stuff and possibly even longer range missile systems to strike farther into Russia to try and bring an end to this without supporting an invasion of Russia? Or do you just, I mean, how does that end up working out if we end up in that stalemate long range? I mean, is their only option is, well, Putin needs to essentially go away and hope we get somebody who's less crazy and willing to negotiate? I mean, that's got to go somewhere.
I think there's two things that are going to decide how this war turns out. Number one are all the struggles going on behind closed doors in the Kremlin right now, which arguably are far more important to determining the outcome of the war than anything happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. The second thing is what I would call donor fatigue. All the countries, US included, who have been giving stuff to Ukraine so that they can defend themselves, eventually fatigue of continuing to do that is going to set in, because it's costing those governments enough money that it's impacting their ability to provide services to their own citizens. You can do that in the short term because everybody sees the horrible war in Ukraine going on and they feel for the Ukrainians. But as we saw with the Vietnam War, every night you got the stuff coming on the TV, and finally it's like, that's when you go and, make your dinner, and nobody's really paying attention to it. So if that happens, if donor fatigue sets in and you stop getting Western support to Ukraine, it makes it really tough for Ukraine to continue to prosecute the war. And at that point, they may have to start caving on some of their inflexible demands about, all Russians out, all people home, reparations, yada, yada, yada. These are the two sides to the coin that both sides are hoping will happen to the other before it happens to them.
Okay. My other question.
Let me interrupt real quick. Can you hold on to that question for 1 second? I want to make sure, because I don't know. I think Mowdy may be slightly more time limited, so I just want to make sure that.
Okay.
Is that how are you doing, Christopher?
I just needed to unmute my mic. I appreciate it. Actually, no. I'm just listening and soaking it in. I'm enjoying everything so far. I do have questions, but I'll hold them until the more salient point. But nothing super pressing right now.
Marvelous. Zandering, please take it away.
And all three of you should feel free to interrupt me at any point if you do have questions that you want me to clarify.
All right, that's enough of you. I'm going to interrupt you now.
All right, please stop talking then, if that's the case.
Excuse my interruption of your interruption.
I feel powerful all of a sudden, very empowered.
My second question has to do with, okay, let's say we've gotten the right set of circumstances and the war is more or less over. However, it really kind of comes about, war is over. And Ukraine goes into kind of rebuilding, Russia's doing whatever happens. Do you have any kinds of concerns? Ukraine, I hate to say this because it sounds like I'm criticizing Ukraine, but it's still just simply a fact. Before the war, Ukraine was not exactly the bastion or beacon of democracy sitting on the hill. They had a lot of problems with corruptions. One of the largest black market weapons markets was operating out of Ukraine. So they weren't exactly white as the driven snow. Afterwards, they have been given all of this fairly modern military equipment. Do you think that there might be any other concerns, especially for maybe some smaller neighbors, of Ukraine becoming a possible aggressor?
Well, Ukraine really has no ability to project power across the sea. So Turkey is safe. Georgia is safe. Anybody who's got a Black Sea coast but no actual land border with Ukraine is relatively safe from such a thing. So what you're really looking at is countries with borders on Ukraine. Most of those are already NATO members. The one exception, and I'm not positive about this, is that Moldova, I don't think, is a NATO member.
No, they're not. I'm thinking of specifically of Moldova and Belarus.
Okay, yeah. Honestly,
especially Belarus.
Yeah. I honestly don't think the Ukrainians would use all that military equipment to go on some war of conquest into either of those two countries. I mean, they're going to still be licking their wounds from this war. And let's be absolutely clear. We get all these, the Russians have taken 150,000 dead and probably 3 times that in wounded casualties during the course of this war. Nobody talks about how many troops the Ukrainians have lost. It's very high as well. Even if it's only half what the Russians have suffered, that's still a hideously high casualty rate. It's going to have an impact on a small country like that. So they're going to need time to rebuild. I don't see them wanting to immediately start throwing money into a war when they've got this pressing need for reconstruction. Now, could those weapons magically start trickling out to other countries, say in Africa, where there's constant border wars? Maybe South America, where you've got some resentment between countries, or Central America? Yeah, it could. But I think the difference is that the West has pretty solid end user agreements in place with all the stuff that they have been transferred. So technically it would be illegal. And I think the Western countries are much more likely to want to say, okay, it's been 2 years. We'd like to go and inspect and make sure that the blubber tanks we gave you are still there. The Russians probably never did that. And anyway, much of that equipment that was abandoned when the two, Russia and Ukraine went their separate ways, it was excess. There were no end user agreements in place, so it was very easy and technically not even illegal for the Ukrainians to just load them on a ship and send them wherever they wanted. So I think, yeah, there's a risk, but I don't think it's as severe as might be the case.
Well, one of the shining spots, at least, is Ukraine has over, and they're like, okay, well, how will this kind of come about? How will reattack? We may want to take chunks of Belarus to stop this as a buffer zone while we have all this equipment. And I'm just wondering if any of these things are thoughts. It makes it sound like I'm criticizing Ukraine like they're a horrible place. And I'm just thinking this is the world that we live in,
Yes, it is. So here's my thought on that. I think it's far more likely, I would even argue it's probable, that Ukraine will look north at Belarus and say, 𝐒𝐤𝐿𝐴 is absolutely despised by his own people. and we have enough of a porous border, it would be easy to start encouraging the Belarusian people to have their own version of a revolution of dignity and make him go away. Ukraine's hands remain at least plausibly deniable clean by not sending actual troops in, but they could certainly help finance and support with, covert arms shipments and such any Belarusian what would you call them, insurgent faction that wants to overthrow Lukashenko.
Yeah, that was what I was kind of wondering about was, if things get over, Ukraine's going to have a hell of a military advantage against any of its neighbors. Not so much a personnel advantage because they are suffering. I think they're going to run out of people before they'll run out of equipment to prosecute the war. But I'm just curious if it say it ends next year, and we're able to get, a cessation and some sort of peace agreement. If they're thinking we're already here before we, go through the process of trying to rebuild everything for somebody else to knock down, do we want to try and make a more secure border region so that this doesn't happen to us again?
Yeah, that might happen. I think Moldova is going to kick out the Transnistria enclave pretty soon anyway. I don't see that the Russians can actively support some tiny group in a small alleged breakaway republic from Moldova. And once they're gone and Moldova's sitting there, well, we've got NATO, Romania on one side, and at least
Poland on the other.
Yeah, and well, I don't think they have a Moldova has a border with. I think they're.
Oh no, Moldova doesn't.
Yes, but I'm saying
Ukraine borders Poland.
Right. No, I'm talking about Moldova, and I think that Moldova could easily say, "Yeah, we're going to expel the Russians and start trying to work ourselves into the NATO arrangement." That might happen.
Oh, that would be wise for them.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like the Kaliningrad used to be Königsberg enclave that Russia has up on the Polish-Lithuanian border. That little used to be East Prussia, and it's only been there for since 1945, and it's already having a distinctly different cultural milieu than the alleged Russian homeland. And it's pretty much thoroughly populated with Russians, because at the end of World War II, the Russians literally moved the entire German-speaking population out of that province. And already that's, they're different than Russians. They think differently. They have different attractions.
Well, they got a lot of different influences on them as well.
Exactly. And that's why I'm saying, that's why I don't see how the Transnistria separatists in Moldova can survive. They'll get merged eventually into Moldova. The separatist region will have no choice because they'll have no visible means of support. And once that happens, Moldova's sandwiched between two Western-leaning countries. It makes sense to just say, let's fix things.
Yeah, and Moldova doesn't really have a military to speak of, so yeah, they're probably going to want to be very friendly with the countries that surround them.
Precisely.
Those are the two questions I kind of had a burning desire to know.
Sure.
All right, and sorry for the echo there earlier. I think that it didn't go out to the guests, but it went out to the live feed. I do apologize for that. Only on in time. So Christopher, I know you had a couple questions, and we do have the so-called live map up. This is a map that gives us a pretty consistent an accurate report of exactly the status of the war. It's not it is a map of Ukraine, but it operates a bit more as a sort of a tactical map of what's going on. So hopefully that will meet your needs. I'm sorry you can't screen share, so let me know if this works, and let's bring that back up here. And
nice. Yeah, especially with what both Commander and 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐴NDRI were just talking about. I thought having a map up would help. But also, so I guess this is related to the question that I had asked earlier. Let's see. Would there be any reason for NATO, not NATO, or for other nations that are attempting to help Ukraine, would there be any motivation to purposely put them in crushing debt? Is there a strategic advantage to that in any way, shape, or form?
It's a strategic advantage if you're trying to profit off of this. And yeah, we're dealing with capitalist states, and profit is the driving motive that makes those countries run. So yeah, from that perspective, sure, you want to put Ukraine into crippling debt, and thereby they're beholden to you. They have to do what you tell them.
And just remind us, what resources Ukraine is rich in.
They're a huge producer of grain. Arguably, they're the breadbasket of the world these days in some ways. That's why, even though they're at war, they and the Russians have come to an agreement that they can continue to ship grain out from Odessa, because if you can't ship that grain out, it's harming other countries around the world who depend on that grain to feed their people. So it benefits the Russians to some extent because it's goodwill, plus they're exporting some of their own grain too. So I would argue that's the key resource they have. They also have fairly good heavy industry, or did before the war, in the border area on the eastern border, the Donetsk, Luhansk, the whole Donetsk Basin area. And that includes the iron ore, that includes chromium, that includes coal, all those kind of resources in that side that fuels those industries. They have a pretty good high-tech aviation kind of industry. So all of that factors into why people would want to grab Ukraine if you're looking at it strictly from an economic standpoint. And if you put those businesses into debt, then you can use that to affect both what they're producing and how much they're producing. So if you're, let's say, arguably France or Germany, and you don't want the Ukrainian aerospace industry competing with your industry that's producing aerospace equipment, you can kind of say, well, we're calling in our debt unless you reduce your production of these items. And you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
You can manipulate the market to your benefit by using debt as a weapon. The flip side is that if that becomes too crushing, you're basically pushing Ukraine into the hands of Russia again.
Okay.
If the debt is so bad that Ukraine can't rebuild, can't recover, they may have no option but to say, yeah, well, okay, we renounce and default on all our debts to you, and we're going to be buddy-buddy with the guy who just killed tens.
But doesn't that assume that there's going to be a united country known as Russia when everything's said and done?
I know a lot of people have speculated that Russia will go away. I think that's an idiotic concept. I think Russia will exist. it will be in a different form from what we see today. I think some of the semi-autonomous regions may get to become independent countries. I think, the government style of Russia could certainly change to something that's less autocratic. But yeah, Russia's going to,
the 𝐍𝐤𝐜𝐸, or whatever his name is, 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴N, that geopolitical guy, his line is that Russia is going to turn into a bunch of provinces.
there's too much cultural, religious, linguistic uniformity across the country for that to really happen.
Okay.
Peter 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐸's also predicting the fall of China too. It's going to economically implode. They're having a huge problem with their demographics as well, and it's going to end up breaking up as well. So
we're gonna on In Time. I think we're gonna pick one or two of his videos, and I think Commander 𝐬𝐿𝐸𝐻𝐸 and I and Mowdy, you're certainly more than welcome. We're gonna watch one of his videos and do a commentary, running commentary as it goes, because he's been around long enough.
Those videos are like 10 minutes long, so that's perfect.
Yep. So we'll do that.
That would be
in
great.
fact, that may be a good thing for next week. So let me see if we can get that scheduled for next week. But anyways, yes, I know who you're. I recognize the question as soon as you said that's assuming Russia. I was like, I know where that's coming from.
Well, it provoked exactly the response that I want. Commander McMillan. That's stupid.
Yeah.
No, we've discussed him. We've discussed him already. So, all right. Well, were there any other? The two things I definitely want to discuss was the Su-27 destruction, or whether it was vandalism.
I think it's Su-57 actually. I don't think there is an Su-27. There's a MiG-27.
I will look. I will look and see what it was. Yeah. So I'll get that sorted out and Bakhmut. Unless somebody else has something, I want to make sure everybody's gotten.
No, let's move forward.
All right. So,
Sandring?
Was it an Su-20? I will look.
Yeah.
So because I don't.
As long as you got the map up, let's bring it back up, and if you can zoom in on the Bakhmut area, that would help. It's that one lone blue dot right next to all that red.
How's that?
Yep. So what is going on here? Bakhmut is they keep arguing about whether it's a town or a city. To my mind, 80,000 people is a town. It's a large town. It's right there in the center of this of your screenshot right there. As you can see, there's Russian red on every side but one. And that's what's going on, is the Russians are trying to encircle the place, which will force whoever is remaining in the town to eventually surrender, because they aren't going to be able to get supplies to them. Even now, it's difficult to get supplies to them because there are no major arterial roads into the town that aren't under potential Russian fire. That's what's going on there.
And a couple weeks ago it was even worse, right? I mean, they had basically strategically or tactically I forget, they effectively encircled it such that nothing. I mean, there was a few areas you could get through, but it was all woods and water, and it's been somewhat freed up. But yeah.
So it's a very serious situation for the Ukrainians. I think the reason they continue to hold it rather than pull back and go to the next line of defense they have, which they already have in place, the reason they continue to do this is because the Russians are willing to keep battering their heads against that wall. The casualty exchange rate has been reported as high as, 7-8 to 1. So for every Ukrainian soldier who's killed or wounded, 7 to 8 Russian soldiers are killed or wounded in this fighting around here. The numbers for armored vehicles is probably even higher, probably on the 10 or 11 to 1 scale. And the Russians are willing to suffer those losses to take this relatively unimportant town. Part of the reason people speculate they're doing it is simply because Bakhmut is next to their supply centers. So it's easy for them to supply an offensive effort in this region. Taking it doesn't really get them much of anything, but it does give Putin and the high command the ability to, as Napoleon used to say, slap some good news on the walls of Paris, in this case, Moscow. It's, look, we've done something glorious. We've taken this town.
Yeah.
They don't have to say, yeah, we lost 80,000 men taking a place, but what the heck? Who cares? They're only people.
So
That's what's going on.
Essentially, the Battle of Thermopylae. It's the movie 300 was. Yeah, they're basically, the Ukrainians are like, well, we can use, relatively speaking, a minimum amount of troops here to hold this position and just bleed them as they throw troops at it, and with the expectation that they may still well lose it, but if they do, the cost will be, what was that at the end of Bunker Hill? The Battle of Bunker Hill, the U.S. Revolutionary War, the Brits said, if we win another battle like that, we'll lose the war.
Yeah, exactly. And, a Pyrrhic victory. That's exactly what you're looking at here.
All right, so
if they take it.
Okay, and it looks like, if they're willing to just keep throwing men at it, I have to believe eventually they'll get it. It's mostly encircled, unless the if Bakhmut can hold out until the offensive, I can see maybe doing that, but I don't see it holding out that long. All right, and so our last question is, but before we get to that, so I believe, let's see, so Mr. Mowdy, I believe you're on your way out. Is that the case?
It is indeed. It was a pleasure talking to you both, and well, all three of you. Is Andrew, you're still there, right? I'll take your silence as a yes.
Yes, I am. I'm driving up I-5 through the Puget Sound, and so I'm like muting when I'm not actually saying. It takes me a minute.
Oh yeah, I hear
I'll
you.
wave as you go by.
All
right, everyone, have a good night.
It was good to see you. Thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate it. It was good to see you. All right. So there was this is an interesting one, and I thought it was worth discussing. It appears to be a small thing, but given the location and a couple of other factors, I thought it was probably worth discussing, and then we'll wrap it up. But there was so what I'm reading here is an Su-27. Okay. There was a video published by Freedom of Russia. They are claiming that they've committed arson on an Su-27. Presumably, it's been damaged at least beyond usability right now. Whether it's been destroyed, I don't know. But at any rate, what can you tell us about it?
Okay. Yes, there is an Su-27. I just looked it up. It's called the Flanker. It's a twin-engine, very maneuverable fighter aircraft. So
one of the most modern, right? It's like their so-called fifth gen.
Among them. Okay. Yeah, it's definitely fifth gen, but it's not sixth. The key thing to me that stands out in this report, if it's true, is that it's not happening near Ukraine. This is by the aircraft was on a base that's near Vladivostok, which is on Russia's far eastern Pacific coast, by Korea, basically.
Well, we may even have it here. I will bet you there it is.
Little green dot.
Little green fire dot right there. So yeah, if you look at the map, yeah, it's wow.
Yeah, more clumsy Russian soldiers smoking where they shouldn't smoke.
Yeah, so there's Ukraine on the left. There is where this happened.
Halfway around the world.
Yeah. All right.
So I seriously doubt, if this is true, that Ukraine has any direct connection with it. if it is true, I suspect it's Russian people, likely ethnic minorities, who are starting to flex their muscles. And that's where we get this whole what if Russia breaks up thing. We know that the majority of the population in the Russian Far East are either ethnic Mongolians or Han, Chinese. So they don't have a lot of affinity or connection with, the central government back in Moscow. It's potentially likely they could say, screw this, and try to go their own way, especially since so much of the Russian military, which is what provides security, internal security in the country, are now distracted and are operating on the other side. But let's be honest, the destruction of a single airplane over in the Far East, it's certainly indicative of, there's dissatisfaction and unrest over there, but is it an organized independence movement, a separatist movement? Probably not.
Well, it is. So as they've been keeping their most technologically advanced aircraft out of Ukraine, is that right? Why not put their most advanced, like the high end Su aircraft into Ukraine? Why not just bring the best you got?
They have been flying. Su-27s. They have been flying even other more modern aircraft in the area, but they are still holding significant reserves of top end aircraft, on other border areas, because they still need to provide some sort of deterrent against neighbors getting frisky. Over in the Far East, as Sarah Palin said, I can see Russia from my bedroom window. And the reverse is true too. The Russians can see Alaska and American territory from their bedroom window. Yeah, right. But you get my meaning.
I do.
But more importantly, I think, is the fact that the Chinese are there, so close to that city, that border.
What?
Go ahead.
Sorry, please. Well, I'm just my question is what I think you were about to say anyway. So I apologize for interrupting. What concern is it that China's there? Aren't they allies?
No. They have interests that. They have interests that coincide.
We're besties. There's no air. There's no space or daylight between us. Didn't he say that?
There has never been a huge closeness between the two countries as far back as when Mao, took power in the 50s. It's not something that's, a big deal. They've actually had border skirmishes, the Chinese and the Russians have, on a couple of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
So the Russians keep significant numbers of troops stationed in the Far East just as a deterrent to prevent the Chinese, who, as we know, have, allegedly something like a quarter of the Earth's population living in China. And, I'm sure it's getting kind of crowded, so they can look north and see all that relatively empty territory filled with all manner of wonderful natural resources. And, if you were an ambitious Chinese leader and saw that the guy who owns that territory is a bit distracted and has been stripping your border region, you just might say, maybe I should try something.
And there is swaths of contested territory there that China already thinks is theirs and Russia is currently occupying.
Yep, exactly.
All right.
So it's not a comfortable border. And that's one of the reasons you're going to see Su-27s, MiG-31s, etc., all stationed on that side. You'll also see them up on the Finnish border, up on the Norwegian border, probably up against the Baltic states border. The Russians are not so much concerned or intending to attack there, at least not yet, but they are always concerned that they're going to be attacked by those avenues. You've got to remember that while we in the West always viewed the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact as an aggressor who was going to invade the West, the Russians saw the exact mirror vision. They saw NATO as an offensive alliance that was intending to invade and destroy the communist state.
Mm.
And that hasn't changed. I mean, it's not that it's going to end the communist state, but the Russian psyche says we're going to be attacked by these people on our borders. And let's be honest, Russia's history is full of them being attacked by people as far back as the Mongols and the Crusaders that came out of the Germany and the Baltic states attacking in that area. So, and the Poles and everybody.
And there is no, I don't think he was talking about, there's a question in the side chat. I don't want to speak for Lance. There's a question about whether or not they see an attack on Norway. I don't think you're suggesting that. You're suggesting that the Russians are afraid that they'll be attacked by countries in the
right.
I mean,
it's extreme Arctic force, way up there, supplying forces to do anything, as the Germans learned very hard lesson in World War II, trying to conduct offensive operations in the far north in the Arctic region is nearly impossible. I don't think either side is going to attack, but the Russian psyche says, yep, we're going to be attacked. That's why they have forces stationed up there. And we know that one of the units that was pulled down and fought and got absolutely annihilated was one of the Arctic, especially Arctic trained mechanized brigades that was watching the Norwegian border.
And to be fair, and this is something that, people say, well, NATO is just a defensive organization that never try to eliminate Russia. We've been trying to eliminate Russia for a long time. We've just been doing it economically. Are we going to, invade Russia? No. Are we trying to get the entire country to dissolve and be wiped off the face of the earth so that we can spread democracy in our way of doing things? Yes, absolutely, 100% we are hostile to Russia, have been for a very long time, and they're not paranoid on the front. So, does that sound like a reasonable assessment to you, Commander?
Yes and no. I don't think the West wants to destroy Russia. What we want to do is change Russia and have it, continue with Peter the Great's reforms and try to become more like the West so it is a capitalist democratic state and can join the family of friendly nations who are competing economically against one another. Russia doesn't think in those terms, and that's what they're hoping, I think, to change.
I completely agree with you. And in our view, that's not destroying them, that's modernizing them and bringing them up. But to their view, that's destroying them. We want to destroy their system.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the perspective that they have, that the U.S. is out to destroy them, is not incorrect. In as much as it's internally consistent and accurate from that perspective.
Right. From their viewpoint, that's exactly what's going on.
And so you have to
every McDonald's built in Russia was a stab at the heart of Russian culture.
Yes, exactly. So, and every time they loved it and stood in line for 6 hours just to get a Happy Meal, which they did.
It was proof positive that their viewpoint was correct.
Exactly. All right. Well, good. So I think we're in agreement. Is Andring, any final thoughts before we go?
I hope we can see an end to the war somewhat sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree.
I
can get my Saturdays back.
Oh, and I did want to talk about that for 1 second. So, two quick things. For those of you who missed Starsky today, we are disappointed that he was not able to make it. We discussed why at the beginning of the show. I've been in contact with him, and he had what appears to be a rather urgent, pressing matter that he had to attend. So he was talking with his command. And he was just not going to make it. So he was very apologetic, which was awfully sweet of him. I'm glad he's doing what he needs to be doing, and more importantly, I'm hoping he's staying safe, which he appears to be as much as is possible over there. I suspect he will still be on with the Shills tomorrow. That's Saturday. The Shills is a channel. I will drop the link to them in the live chat. I've actually known them for a little while. All of them, every single one of them, sweetheart, really nice people. They've had me on a whole bunch of times, which they've been very gracious about. I enjoy going. Dick Dawson is one of them. He's also come over here and helped us out every now and then, which I sincerely appreciate. So, and actually, without them, we probably would not have met Starsky, at least certainly not so soon, and maybe not ever. So I'm certainly appreciative of that. And if you've missed him here, I highly recommend going to see him there. Also, the Commander McMillan joins when he can on the Shills, and sounds like you'll be trying to join them tomorrow, Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Is that right? No?
Won't be able to.
Won't be able to. All right. I hopefully will be able to.
I have to take somebody to the airport, so I won't be back in time.
Oh, all right. So, but he often joins. I certainly will attempt to be there, and I'm there more often than not on the Saturdays. So, that's another opportunity for you to see Starsky. And once again, and I've said this before, so first of all, we've got a Discord. Come join us on that Discord. You can ask Commander McMillan your questions. So if you feel like there's a question we missed, we did a lot today. You can ask the commander yourself on our Discord. And we're also keeping up with the latest breaking in Ukraine on that Discord, and as well as any number of other things. We try to have a robust news Discord that includes also, we are, this is an American show, but we believe very strongly that the world is anything that happens just about anywhere in the world affects all of us. So our Discord is pretty robust on what's going on across the world, and we think that's very important. So I hope you'll join us on that. Also, we are simulcasting right now. We're actually on Facebook right now. We're live on Facebook, so we hope you're enjoying that. We have a Facebook page. We have Instagram, TikTok now, believe it or not. But all that notwithstanding, if you're seeing us on YouTube, we have our sister show Overtime. Go over there, subscribe. It really helps us out. It helps us with the algorithm, and we're trying to get that channel to 1,000 subs. Makes it so that you can super chat there, and is really a huge help. In Time is our main channel. This is the In Time show. We have a number of other shows. Overtime. Nick of Time. That's where they give me 5 minutes to talk on a subject, and I take 20. But we hope that you like that, and if you want to super chat, again, all super chats are donated to the charity of Starsky's Choice, which is the Vatra volunteer organization. The details for that are down in the description. If you want to donate after the show, you can do that as well, and there's any number of ways to do that. We have all of their contact information. We certainly appreciate all of the super chats we've gotten, and we appreciate the people who have liked, subscribed, shared our content, and given the thumbs up, because that really does help us in the algorithm. So thank you all very much. Before we go, Commander, do you think that there's anything that we missed that we should discuss? And there's some Russian in the live chat, so I'm going to try my really poor Russian reading skills and see if I can decipher what it's saying.
Okay. I don't really have anything to add beyond what we've already talked about. The one thing that always bothers me is that we are, as this war progresses, we're increasingly seeing all Russians are bad, the more dead Russians, the better, etc. sentiment. And that really bothers me. I think what we have is Russians who are being oppressed and manipulated by an unsavory government. But I don't think the Russian people themselves are necessarily horrible, and that's one of the things I'm hoping will happen, bring peace, so that not only the Ukrainians but the Russians too can stop dying in this pointless conflict for one man's ego.
You and I have had this discussion a couple of times, and it's a really interesting one to talk about Russian culture. And that's another one. I was fascinated with it in high school. I learned the Russian language. I was one of the last Americans out of the Soviet Union before it collapsed. And I mean, I was out within hours. It collapsed within hours later. And I've always been fascinated with it, and it's been great to talk to you about it because so few people really do understand it. And you and I think, have a shared understanding of how that culture works. But I think I told you the story. I was in the shop. I was at like a Macy's or something like that. My wife and I were there, and my wife had 3 or 4 duplicate coupons that she could not use. So as we were paying for these things, she realized she couldn't use them. And she offered them to the lady behind us. And the lady was like, yeah, 𝐒𝐤𝐸𝐿, I don't speak English, sorry. And my wife was like, wait a minute, was that Russian? And she asked me if that was Russian. I said, yes. She says, well, could you offer these to her? So I offered them to her, the coupons in Russian. And she responded in perfect English, thank you, no, I don't need the coupons, but thank you. And you and I have discussed that exact incident where what I realized at that point was she decided I was probably either a KGB agent or an American double agent. And in either case, she was going to be polite, but she wasn't going to, as little engagement as possible. And we've discussed,
I will take
Russia,
no bribes from the spy.
Yeah, exactly. And I was almost killed. I was, okay. I had a whole bunch of AK-47s aimed at me for refusing to bribe a border guard a sufficient amount, which came as a shock to me because I'm an American. You don't bribe border guards. Well, yeah. So, but the culture has dealt with a secret police for, as you had said earlier, generations back. And this idea that you have to inform on your neighbors, you can't trust anyone, you can't trust your parents, you can't trust your children. Past a certain point, any of them could turn you in. They could all be secret police. And so they don't stir the pot, and they don't engage in a way that the rest of us in Western cultures are used to. And what that means is when their government does some really shitty things, they don't do anything about it because they've got a government that has more than once said, okay, anybody who disagrees with us, we want you to come to the Kremlin tomorrow noon, and they just execute everybody. And if you don't go, they'll come to your door and find you. And so it's a very different culture, and it's very hard for the people there to resist their own government in a way that we are used to at least being able to challenge ours. Does that sound reasonably fair to you?
Oh, yeah. And as you said, this goes way back. There's, the Decembrist uprising that occurs, shortly after the Napoleonic Wars, where they're actually princes, aristocrats are trying to urge certain reforms, and they're military officers, and so they march their regiments out, and they're not being threatening. They're all just parade, standing in the middle of Red Square saying, we really would like you to look at these demands about what we want changed to make the government better for the Russian people. And the Tsar's answer is to bring in artillery and kill them all. That's no, I'm serious. And that's the way Russia works. It's do not stand up and say anything that makes the government think that you're not totally behind them, because they will deal with you.
Well, I think you were the one who gave me this joke, and I'm sitting there going like, when you understand Russian culture, I was like, yeah, it's actually kind of a hilarious joke, but it's also, yep, it's on the nose. There's a protest, and somebody stands up in Russia and says, hey, we have no free speech. And another person next to him goes, shh, you can't say that. And the next morning, both of them vanished.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, you can't even point out that you can't point things out. You can't, it's not. So, and that's one of the things.
The tall blade of grass, the mower will cut you.
Exactly. Well, that's one of the things I like about Starsky is he's been very good about differentiating that and realizing that. But I have to believe as time wears on and as more of his friends are killed, and he's talked about who he's lost on this show, and that's a difficult conversation. As more of that happens, I imagine it's going to be harder and harder to not blame everybody in Russia for what's going on. It is among the worst situations that you can have, that any human being can be in. So it's bad for everybody. Thank you, Commander, for joining us. Thank you, Christopher Motti. Even though you're not here now, we still have your sort of frozen image right there. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Yeah, I'm bummed I didn't get him in some compromising pose. But thank you, 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐿, also for coming by and joining us.
You did get him enough of a. You did give him enough of a pose that he looks like an evil supervillain.
Yes, he does.
He does. I'm gonna. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna. Before we go, I'm gonna just blow that up, screenshot that, and I have so many things I could do with that. So thank you for that.
He has that mischievous, evil smirk that you associate with the supervillain, just reaching out to press the button that will,
he does.
Send the giant space alien to devour the city.
He reminds me of one in particular, but I can't think of which one. I'll have to think about that. All right. Well, perfect. Well, thank you all very much. And once again, please do like, subscribe, share. It really does help us out. Join us on the Discord, and we can continue these conversations. We will be back next week, barring any breaking news. And I think we've got a couple of shows planned. In fact, 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐿, maybe after this, we can all talk. I'm going to have to head out. But we can talk about, we're going to do a show on sort of logistics in the U.S. That was Macmillan's idea. So now that we've got 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐿 here, we'll maybe schedule that for next week. And 𝐍𝐤𝐜𝐸, or whatever his name is, will be covering that as
𝐍𝐤𝐜𝐸.
well. So 𝐍𝐤𝐜𝐸, thank you. So we'll be doing that. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week. Have a good weekend all.